Some people came up to me during break, but if there's anything you want to ask out loud or push back on or say you want to hear more on, let's take, we have some time, so let's take some time. I think there are some roaming mics, so just raise your hand. Oh. Is the winner.
Okay, so I am a perfectionist, and I ask my kids, and they recognize some of the negative effects of that, obviously. Even my 9-year-old knows. So we're in the teen years with my older two. What are some ways to disciple our teens as they waffle between laziness and drivenness, and they ride that wave of apathy, and then they crash into perfectionism? What do we do with that?
Yeah. It's funny, I want to make a joke, but it probably wouldn't be appropriate, right? Lock them up for a while, I don't know. It's a really good question because I do think we can relate to this. And one of the things that I guess surprised and then it didn't at all is I used to think you had like workaholics and then you had slothful people. That's gotten way more messy for me now. Like, there's one author many of you would know and have read many of his books, and I remember talking to him about this, and he told me, Kelly, I really struggle with sloth. And I didn't believe him. I'm like, how can you do all the things, like you've written all these things, done all these things, and it's basically like either I'm on or I'm off. And then I start asking, and I'm like, that's actually a pretty common phenomenon. Part of what's happening is people who are quote-unquote workaholics, or however you want to put it, they would just work because they're actually terrified of themselves because they know what's going to happen if they don't. And so I think this is very difficult because, I mean, as a parent myself, even just having two very different personalities, and I think part of what we have to do, I'm not going to say anything you don't know, but part of what we have to do is remember there is not actually a way. It's that you've got to navigate life with them, and this isn't just teens. And there are sometimes we need to actually hear, you need to work harder, and sometimes we need to hear, you need to rest. And so this is a long way of me of saying, I've really become convinced that we're not very good judges ourselves. It takes a community. And it's particularly dicey with kids because they're actually growing. They actually don't, like the male brain is just not that developed. I mean, it's developed, but not what you'd think at 14, 15 years old. Their brain keeps going longer than the girl's brain. They're behind in all kinds of ways. And then we've got some cultural forces. But put it this way, for example, and make it more personal, so this is not about teens, but I am someone who like, because of guilt or whatever, I'm gonna work. And, it's become a joke in the family, but sometimes like at night, Tabitha will see me with my laptop. Now, sometimes it's harvest time, and I just have to work really long, and actually she and I are in one of those right now. It's 3 very intense weeks. But anyways, sometimes she'll see me working on the computer, and she says like, wait, are you working right now? Right? And sometimes it's legitimate, like, no, it's appropriate, it's harvest. But when it's not, she'll look like, are you working? And I'm like, well, yeah. And she's like, done, you're done, ESPN right now. And I love that because I know it's hilarious, and please don't get mad at me. You're like, why are you wasting time with ESPN? But whatever. But here's the point. If 2 minutes earlier I would have gone into the bedroom or into the bathroom and looked in the mirror and said, Kelly, I think you should be done. You've worked really hard today for paid labor. I'd say, you lazy. But when she says it, I trust her. And so I think with our teens, part of the challenge is learning to honor when they're working hard and getting them to rest, and learning to challenge them when they're not. And I just think it's really so frustrating. But you're trying to build their habits. The medievals talked about this as the habitus. And you can actually make a little tree go any direction. Like if you plant a stick, and as that tree starts to grow, you just tie it around, and you can get it to twirl like this, as long as you start early on. Right? There will be resistance, but you can. And so I do think that's very important. But here's the painful, and this is the last thing I'll say on this. Here's the painful part, although we all know this. They really are not that interested in what we say compared to what we do. And they either can learn like sloth from us, or they can learn overwork. And one of the things I have found, I live in this tension as a college professor and as a parent. I now see a lot of kids who are like, I know my parents are making this kind of money, have this, I'm actually not interested in doing what they're doing because none of that looks appealing to me. And the parents are like, why aren't you doing what we're doing? And they're like, because you're miserable. But I don't want to tell you that because I don't want to hurt your feelings. It's a very hard tension. Yeah. Did I just shut it down? Sorry. You're all doing great. No, it drives me crazy because like my college kids, they come home and I can't, even though I'm a college professor, I should remember, like, this is their break. And I'm like, why are you laying around? So I'm not very good at this either.
So you mentioned that Christians will often equate like 30 minutes of their week to 2 hours with worship, like the almost conflating singing with worship. How do we best help our brothers and sisters experience a shift in like their paradigm of worship? Like, how do we best foster the concept of true worship?
Yeah,
what that looks like.
It's a great question, especially clearly because you have gifts and can help lead singing. So no pressure on. Yeah, just a neutral question. That's all. I do think, these are baby steps, and I'm not like super grumpy about this. It's rather than the language, it's the deeper thing that I care about, that I struggle with my own life. But I do think it would help us if our language was more like, we're now going to worship through preaching and hearing God's word. We're worshiping through giving of our tithes and offerings. We're now worshiping through our singing. Even that language, I think, because singing is worship. Right? But I do think there is something important about spreading it out. And then starting to say, and you're not just worshiping God when you have a quiet time. Right? You're going into the workforce, and God is going with you. You didn't have a quiet time with a coach who said, all right, go get it, I'll see you tomorrow. But that is kind of what we're training. Like, this is a spiritual time, now it's not. And we're like, no, we're baptizing the whole thing. He's going with us. He is with us and for us. And he cares about our vocation because he's a creator. He cares about everything, not just like church work. And so that's part of the, I know it doesn't sound like it, but the connection is by saying not just singing is worship, but starting to expand this, you then can eventually help people realize I'm an accountant and that has great dignity. And I can do accounting as an expression of worship. I do think there's something special and particular about corporate worship, so I'm not trying to flatten it all out. I do think corporate worship is special, but there is a way in which the accountant, the school teacher, the parent who's, changing the 7,000th diaper is doing it with and for God as an act of worship. It's very important to get to. Otherwise, it's like, what are we doing here? So,
Sir?
Yes?
Here's one.
I
want to tell you something that happened this past Sunday that blessed my heart so much. Davey is one of several young men that come to the front of our church and will pray with people that come forward. And I saw Davey go to somebody that was one of the men up front taking prayer requests from people and talk to him for a little while and then pray. Then I saw that man go to another third young man, or he came to him rather, and they had some talk, and then they prayed. And by the time the service was over, those three young men were up front, talking with each other, and I'm sure praising God and just having a wonderful time of worship. I mean,
It's good.
I just had to say that because that's one of the
Yeah.
grandest things that I've seen in talking about us worshiping beyond just the church service.
Yeah. And you start to see, like, there's something really holy about the laughter together, right? It does start, you start to go, okay, God actually cares about all of this stuff. And we're not going to make it so narrow. It's good. I think there's one. Yes.
So I was going to say something else, but this kind of came to my mind. So I grew up Islamic, and in Saudi Arabia
Yeah.
and some other countries where they have 3 times
Yes.
loud as can be,
Yeah.
where the azan goes on, and when that goes on, the people of that religion go to the mosque, drop everything they have,
Yeah.
and go pray.
Yeah.
And that can be morning, midday, and evening.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't represent like a time, it just represents the time to pray
Yeah.
and worship. And I thought it was great how you made that example.
Yeah.
Because in so many other cultures and religions, they do that.
Yeah.
And so that time.
And Christians used to do that, actually, quite a bit. Daniel did that.
Right, and even the midday prayers
Yeah.
is ending with what? A time of nap and
Yeah.
rest.
Interesting.
You'll see that in India, you'll see that in Turkey,
Yeah.
you'll see that in so many different areas of the world.
Yeah.
But we never take the time here to even think about prayer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if Jesus said, "Be still,"
Yeah.
know that I'm here.
Absolutely. I mean, one of and there's actually a growing movement on this. Justin, what's Justin's last name? The DC lawyer, some of you, Wembley, was it Wembley? Do you remember, Patrick? Anyways, there's a growing movement that's recognizing how do we recapture this, right? And like, I am not interested in legalism at all. Like, not at all. But there is something like, set your phone for 11:59 in the afternoon, and when it just kind of privately buzzes, no one even has to know you do it. Maybe your hand's under your desk. Maybe you don't even close your eyes. Literally 30 seconds. God, thank you, you are with me. You know, Father, I want to shoot my colleague. You know, thank you for providing this. Whatever it is. But if you make it a pattern in the morning at your office, in the afternoon, and at night, you start to sanctify the whole thing. But we live very fragmented lives. So the only thing spiritual is we try and evangelize in the workplace. And I'm not against that, but it's so much more than that. So actually, I do think it's quite Christian. That's part of what's going on in the Psalms. They talk about praying 5 times a day. It's not legalism. It's just trying to say, we are prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. And so I think one of the things that can help us is stop so romanticizing prayer that you think to really pray, you got to pray for 5 hours. But if you're like, okay, guilt-free, if I pray for 30 seconds every day at noon, I actually think it's transformative. And if you don't make it legalistic, it really can be helpful, right? If you stop making it like, I need to sit down on the knees and I need to, like, and anyways, I won't say more on that, but yeah.
So how much do you think this is related to competitiveness and dominance in our culture in terms of the usage of time and the rejection of finitude, rebellion against the structures God's created?
How much of it is competition? I do think there's a fair amount. And competition there could be healthy versions of that. I think, my guess, it's educated, but I wouldn't want to like. Anyways, I actually think primarily what's driving us is money. That's it's so shaped our economy and our lives in ways I just don't think people appreciate, including me. And then you go around the world, and it's just so very different. And, you know, I just think, yeah, what it looks like, and I don't want to even pick on us like our lifestyles and stuff. There is definitely some of that, and some of the inflation in there. But even just I'm only in my 50s, but it is so changed in terms of single income homes, super, super rare. And I'm not inherently against two people. Anyways, I just think the economics are driving us in all kinds of ways that we don't realize. And that shapes all these other things. And then all kinds of unrealistic expectations. Like one piece of data that shocked me, and I just like, how could this possibly be? And it's more recent. So, what was it, in the 70s? I'm going to get some of but the fundamental point will be right. It was like in the 70s where it was, primarily, they were looking at how much time parents, where they had one person, it was almost always women at the time, a stay-at-home parent at home raising kids, how much time per day on average did that mom spend with their kid? Stay-at-home parent. Compared to a working mom today. And here's what's crazy. They said the data is that working moms tend to spend more time with that kid now than they did in the 70s when they were stay-at-home parents. And I'm like, can't be. It's very interesting. Part of what's happened is completely changed expectations. Right? I mean, I don't totally want to go down memory lane, but again, I'm just in my 50s, but I remember, you've seen comedians talk about this. Like, think about it. At 10 o'clock at night, for many of us, there used to be a commercial that would come on and say, it's 10 o'clock at night. Do you know where your children are? That's absurd now. You're like, did you hate your children? Right? The pendulum can swing, but it's really, really interesting. And I would just say, here's what happens with technology. Every piece of technology that promises to save us time just increases our expectations. So historians talk about vacuums are awesome. Washing machines are awesome. But even, we weren't living in India. When we lived in London, people didn't have washing machines very often. And you know what that meant? They had far fewer clothes. They would rewear things, and it'd take long. It's just totally different. And what happens is these time-saving devices increase how much you think you should be able to do. And it increases, the view of what a clean house is very different now than it was 150 years ago. Radically different. But it's very hard for us. So I just think it's fascinating. It's super complex. I think maybe one last one, if there is. Yeah.
So at first you mentioned being dependent. So how do you practice being dependent on your community if it's easier to do it yourself, or if, because of past experiences, you don't trust them to do it?
Yeah. You're not wrong, It's like being a parent, isn't it? It's so much easier to mow your lawn without a kid. You know what I mean? Or to make dinner without a kid. But you got to actually help the kid learn to do these things, right? But that's the thing, isn't it? You're like, I'll just do it. And oh, no, you can't, actually. So I do think there's lots we probably need to do on our own, right? As part of pulling our weight. But you're not wrong, and I don't have great answers except for we've got to keep trying because we desperately need each other. And we tend not to know it until we need people in obvious ways. And part of what happens is we're very good at crisis moments, not very good at lifestyles. So if someone has cancer right away, and we'll bring some meals, we'll do some things, but if someone's dealing with chronic pain, it's quite difficult for a congregation, right? And those are different kind of conversations. But what does it mean? And so I do think we have to cultivate. But here's the problem: you don't get vulnerability without being vulnerable. And to be vulnerable, this is what's terrible about it. To be vulnerable necessarily entails risk, and it's super hard. And the last thing I'm going to talk about vulnerability tomorrow afternoon. So, but that's a very good question. I know it's late, and you have to come back tomorrow. I mean, if you come back tomorrow, God will love you more. Let me just be. It's in the Bible. It's a long book. So, did you have one more thing or? Okay, all set. Thank you guys. I'll see you tomorrow.